Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and welcome to the Opentoonz News. Now, for the first story of the day, we have translating documentation into English. This is a really old story. It was published March 26, 2016. However, we do have documentation. Basically, if you go onto Google, you can type in Opentoonz user manual, and you can see here at the very top, we have this. Now, this, I feel, can actually clear up a lot of confusion. I do use it occasionally, but the main issue is that if you scroll through here, you're not going to see any screenshots, GIFs, or anything visual. So it's really difficult to actually learn an interface purely based off of text alone. And so, seeing as this currently does not exist inside of the help menu or anything like that, it doesn't really do us very much good, at least from my perspective. I do believe that this works a lot like a wiki. So that means that just about anybody can get onto here and figure out how to add GIFs and add images, screenshots, and stuff like that into here. Also, to edit this in order to get it up to date, because this is still pretty much just a copy-paste of the Toons Harlequin guide. Now, if you would like to actually check out the Opentoonz user manual, you can go ahead and click in the video description below. However, also inside of the video description, we have the Toons Harlequin guide. Just go ahead and go into the video description and just click on the link, and you can actually download this from that link. It's actually extremely difficult to find this link nowadays. For some reason, it took me about an hour to find a proper link in order to get this thing. But the thing that I like most about this particular guide is that it has screenshots. It has the images and stuff like that. Of course, it is a different interface because it is a guide for Toons, and Opentoonz has changed dramatically over the last few years that it's been around, but you can find some really good information in here. The problem is that the translation isn't the best and such like that, but there is documentation that people can use in order to learn Opentoonz, even if this information, all of this documentation, is starting to get years and years out of date. That's why we need people to go on to read the docs onto the Opentoonz user manual and get it up to date. So if anyone wants to help out there, then that would be much appreciated in order to keep the Opentoonz user manual up to date and even making it better than this Toons Harlequin guide. That is something that I would like to see, but that is up to you guys, the users of Opentoonz. You guys have to put forth the labor of love in order to keep this documentation, the Opentoonz user manual, up to date. I don't have time for it, but like I said, we do have documentation in English, and so this issue has recently been closed. There's actually been a lot of different issues that have been closed recently in Opentoonz, so the developers have been cleaning house, not just with really old, outdated, stagnant issues, but also issues that they've already fixed because of other issues. There tends to be a backlog of variously different issues that happen to be about the same issue and such. And Opentoonz, just within this last year, and even ever since the most recent update, which was just a few months ago, Opentoonz has undergone some massive changes in a short period of time. It's kind of cool to see. So let's go ahead and move on to the next story of the day. The next story of the day is a default and setting interpolations. It's by Manon John, and it was posted about 6 days prior to me recording this.
This pull request does the following with interpolations. Number 1, adds more default interpolation options in preferences. Requested by a few users, I added constant, exponential, expression, and file to the list of default interpolations to choose from. Number 2, I added the ability to change interpolation between 2 keyframes from the X sheet or timeline, and added options to the context menu brought up when right-clicking the white line between 2 keyframes, allowing you to change the type of interpolation being used. The current interpolation will not be shown. In either case, use of expression and file will still require going into the function editor to provide more information.
711 GM states, let's make such keys. So the main takeaway of this story is that Manonjong has been working really hard to make it so that when you animate with the animate tool, the interpolation, the easing in, the easing out of motions from one keyframe to another can be a little bit more automated and yet still have a little bit more control, without necessarily having to go into the function editor every single time. And what 711 GM is suggesting is something that's actually kind of cool, but do not expect this, what 711 GM is suggesting. This is basically when a developer works really hard to provide something, they showcase what they've been working on, and then, of course, inevitably, somebody has more that they'd like to verbally contribute, but they don't have the expertise to implement the idea. What 711 GM is suggesting is that we don't just have generic keyframes on the timeline or X sheet. What he wants is to be able to see your animation in a glance, to be able to see if you have an easing in or an easing out from one keyframe to another by replacing the generic keyframe icon with some sort of interpolation icon showing an easing in or easing out sort of icon instead of just a key. I like that idea, but if somebody wants to tackle this, if Manonjong wants to tackle this, then I would applaud that. But if all we get is what Manonjong has announced in the OP, the original post, I would be, I'm happy. I really am. Rodney Baker responds,
this will make a lot of Opentoonz users happy. I'd say the expression and file defaults are a work in progress for the present. Perhaps during the next round of updates, a default value for expression and file reference for file might be supplied for those options. They are very useful and powerful. I'm tempted to suggest that in the future round of enhancement, the default expression might simply be the number 0. What this would do is lock everything in place in that channel until or unless expression was manually changed later. It would be very useful in that everything placed on the canvas and keyed while the default was set to expression would automatically be locked in place. The way to be free from this constraint would be to simply delete the key. Similarly, the file interpolation and example text file could be referenced that contained a few happy curve values to be determined to allow for forward movement, reverse movement, stepping, ramp up quickly, full rotations, in other words, values of increments of 360 degrees, etc. We should supply an example file for use there anyway. That's something we as users can supply if we can collect some useful curve data. Thank you so much for this addition.
And I agree with that. This looks awesome. I can't wait till this gets into the program, of course. I don't really exactly know everything that's going on here, but this is cool. I'm really happy that something's being done about the interpolation. This is something that I've complained about with the developers at length, and I'm really glad that something's being done. If this story interests you, feel free to click on the link in the video description below. For the next story of the day, the title is Fix Incorrect Svg Arc Parsing, and this is posted by Calabara Burrows. He states the following.
The current version incorrectly imports paths of SVG files. If the path contains arcs, it can't be split on 90-degree segments.
So he provides the original SVG image right here, and then scrolling down, he shows how it imports into Opentoonz currently. Obviously, these shapes are not correct. They're not the same as the SVG. Now, I've actually covered SVG problems in the past in Opentoonz, and so this is kind of cool to see that someone's addressing this. After the fix, you can see that this more so resembles the original right here. You can see the after the fix, and then you can see that the SVG image original, and just contrasting and comparing, you can totally see that there is a definite improvement here, which, as stated earlier in a previous Opentoonz news video, this is something that has prevented widespread adoption of Opentoonz, and so any improvement with the importing of SVGs is welcome. And so Turtletooth responds, "Thanks a ton, SVG definitely needs some love." And then Rodney Baker responds,
"Thank you, Calabaraburos. I tested the appware and it works as described. As Turtletooth stated, the attention on SVG is appreciated. Aside the most obvious issue I see with SVG at this point is the improper scaling upon import. I'm not sure if it's DPI related, but that seems to be a likely candidate. As SVG is being a vector format, it doesn't have a DPI setting, with Opentoonz possibly factoring DPI in for initial resolution. That might make the difference. One thing I note with this edition is that control points appear to be kept to a minimum. Nice.
And as stated in the previous Opentoonz news video, where I've covered this issue with the continual problems with SVGs, that was a problem. Control points tend to be randomly generated and such like that. And so for them to become predictable, that's awesome. Artist Teacher goes ahead and continues with, "Thanks, Calabaraburos, for tackling SVG. I was testing with one of my own SVGs and found there is still some visual distortion. This SVG should look like this, but it looks like this. There are actually 3 issues here. The slight distortion in the shape, the stroke issue is reported in this specific issue right here, and the missing fill in these 2 issues right here." So these are developers communicating to fellow developers. Really cool, and this is the first time that I've seen Calabaraburos. Nice to meet you, nice to see you. Hope you stick around if you're new. Awesome, nice to see new faces. A link will be supplied in the video description below. For the next story of the day, we have Toonz Raster level anti-aliasing issues. This is something that I've actually noticed.
Issue summary. I'm unable to use any of Opentoonz's anti-aliasing methods on Toonz Raster levels without filled areas bleeding through lines. This includes both the anti-aliasing setting in the level settings dialog box and the apply anti-alias setting in the level dropdown. For the time being, I use Psoft's anti-aliasing plugin for After Effects, but this means that I cannot use many of Opentoonz's effects, namely any that blur, as they can cause issues with it. Screenshot or video reference. Example of the artifacting using high contrast colors. Here you can see the red area overlapping with the green. Also note the green area bleeding through the black line on the right. This occurs on any softness value over 1. This is the transparent view. Here you can see that the artifacting occurs where the line is present. Steps to reproduce. Apply anti-aliasing to any Toonz Raster level that has filled areas and using a softness value over 1.
Rodney Baker responds, "I wonder, is that line a line that had auto paint for line assigned to it?" Naku responds,
"Having the same issue on both latest, stable, and nightly build, with and without auto paint lines. It's obvious even with much less contrasting colors. Strangely, it seems to go away when adding the color blending node in the effects schematic is set to an unrelated index. Moving the indexes entirely seems to remove all lines, making them transparent. That's not an intended effect either." Is it?
Source, auto paint on the right, issue, adding the effects node. The article actually does go on a little bit more, but it gets a little bit high level. But what it seems like to me is that the problem, or the suspected problem, has been detected, and a few ideas are being bounced around as to how to solve this issue. For the next story of the day, we have a story called Attention Please Duik. I don't know what Duik is necessarily. Maybe that's a feature that's seen in After Effects. But basically, he says that this is a really cool tool that's used inside of After Effects, and it's open source, and it's supplied here, the source code and such, for developers developers to take a look. The program works kind of like JavaScript, and there's a review of the program, and he asks a bunch of developers what they think, and he also asks me what I think. Okay, so let me go ahead and just describe what I'm seeing here. Ultimately, in order to fully understand this issue, you have to see the review here inside of this link right here. So a link to the story is supplied in the link in the description below. It's like a 35-minute long video, and I am a little less inclined to watch a 30-minute long video about a program that's not Opentoonz or something like that, some software that I'm not using. But what I did see, I kind of skipped around here and there. It's like an automated system that does half the work in order to provide you with the basic infrastructure for a cutout animation. It quickly goes ahead and applies a bone structure for you to go ahead and work with, and then you can just go ahead and modify it in order for it to work together seamlessly with what you already have rigged up. And so that sounds cool. I like that. There's a lot of automated systems. It looks like there's these little columns here that you're able to just click on, and then select your frame and click on these little sprites, I guess, and then it automatically inserts these expressions on the character's face, which this kind of resembles something that you would see. That's what the level strip is supposed to be used for. As I see it, I think that the level strip just needs to be a little bit more improved, because like every time I turn around, people are trying to animate with the level strip, and they're asking how do I reorganize frames inside of the level strip so I can animate and flip around a little bit easier. Unfortunately, you're going to have to be dealing with a bunch of numbers and stuff like that in order to organize and mess around with the level strip if you're wanting to animate with the level strip, and you can't just click and drag or click a add new level button, kind of like Photoshop or something, adding a new layer on the level strip. There's just not very much on the level strip that's user friendly. You can't just reorganize levels by clicking and dragging them and moving them around and such, which is really unfortunate. But a lot of this, what we see inside of this picture, we could actually get with just improving the level strip. But as for a lot of these automated systems that this guy is showing inside of this video, it is kind of insane. But it looks like it has the potential to make some really cool stuff. Like, it really automates a lot of stuff. It's just that I don't use After Effects, and I'm not really that inclined to actually use After Effects. But I kind of side with what Darren T says. Darren T, he states,
I think it looks amazingly complicated and really useful. I have no idea how much work it would take to allow using it inside of Opentoonz.
It sounds like just what I saw inside of the video. It's just, it looks like a ridiculous amount of programming. Rodney Baker responds with,
"This likely isn't a topic for GitHub and is more for the Opentoonz forum,"
and he supplies a link.
A few observations. Number one, Opentoonz community does need a project like that described related to character animation based on rigs to explore various options for rigging characters that are currently available in Opentoonz.
So people kind of need to be a little bit more aware of what's currently inside of Opentoonz before suggesting what needs to be added into Opentoonz, if that makes sense. But even still, what I saw inside of that video was pretty phenomenal. It sounds like it would streamline a lot of the process of animating a cutout animation. Rodney Baker goes ahead and continues,
"Identify specific shortfalls lacking in Opentoonz that cannot be adequately addressed through use of other readily accessible software. Present these in a way that other developers will find them worthy of their time and attention. Determine how best to move forward to maximize use of cutout animation and rigging in Opentoonz. And 2, we need to be careful in downloading those assets from that link. As they say, the Duik project has been merged with a different project, and those files are therefore outdated. Beyond that, I'm hesitant to look too far into this because I understand the work involved in rigging characters and automating systems required to achieve that result. The difficulty can be overcome where the community is willing to incrementally move forward, better understanding what Opentoonz can currently do, what it might be able to do someday, and how to build bridges between the two." That's what I think.
And I do agree with Rodney here, because there are things here that, like I mentioned, these little sprites of the left and right eyebrow and such like that, they're kind of cool. I mean, there's less work needing to be done. You don't have to like hunt for these specific sprites and throw them into the X sheet or the timeline. Ultimately, we need more people exploring cutout animation in order to speak further, and I'm not that proficient with cutout animation, so I'm not really the expert to talk to about this. Rodney Baker continues and states,
for general discussion and exploration of this topic, you might wish to take up residence in the #rigging channel of the Opentoonz Discord.
And then he supplies a link. And actually, this specific Discord server is really useful. Behemoth chimes in and states,
I would advise you talk on this topic with Agni. He is also interested in adding features from After Effects into Opentoonz.
And we've actually seen one of those recently where I was bug testing the control point animation project. And we can actually already see that some of these are in development, but they're really far away from getting introduced into Opentoonz, and they're extremely buggy, and who knows if they're ever actually going to get introduced into Opentoonz when it's all said and done. Of course, this is possibly the most interesting story that I've reported on so far inside of this video. So don't get me wrong, even though I think that some of these features don't necessarily need to be inside of Opentoonz, it doesn't necessarily mean that Opentoonz can't be modified and inspired by these features over time. But ultimately, what the developers are focusing on right now is optimization. We need to focus on making sure that the program will not crash, because every time that we introduce a new feature into Opentoonz, it causes more potential for the program to crash. And right now, it's time to kind of catch up with the features that have been added into Opentoonz so far, and make sure that the program is as stable as possible before adding, yet again, more features. And the Marevna project is going to be introducing my assistance tool into Opentoonz, which I'm really looking forward to, but I'm sure that's going to come with a few consequences as well, unfortunately. Everything comes in its own time. Of course, you can always create a bounty if you want to offer money in order to get something like that into Opentoonz. And for the next story of the day, we have AutoGap Fill-In Fill Tool. 2Black goes ahead and states the following.
This is still not in. It's the main reason why I stay away from Opentoonz. It's so much faster to paint and color in other programs. Here, it's ridiculous. I've seen old documentary about making anime, and they did spend time on checking every line if it connects, and wasted a ton of time, which is super dumb considering autofill is possible, and it's very hard in Opentoonz to draw lines that connect nicely. Even snap doesn't work as intended, and lines are still not connected properly most of the time. I feel this should be a priority. It's like foundation of animating. Coloring is a nightmare in Opentoonz until we won't get better ways to fill shapes faster. You see, there is gap check that know where are gaps, right? So why don't use this data when filling and actually close the gaps using the same color that disconnected lines are using? I tried Opentoonz years ago and I see it's still not solved. This is really serious and fundamental issue.
I'm sorry if I read that oddly. It's just that it's written from somebody that probably doesn't speak English. But I'm sure everyone understood exactly what was meant because it wasn't that poorly written necessarily. It's just difficult to read. Okay, so I understand that I personally, in the past, I've spoken like this, saying, oh, this is dumb, this is the stupidest thing ever, and stuff like that. And since then, I've kind of taken a step back and tried to have humility, because ultimately these developers are not being paid, and sometimes even offering them money, they still won't accept the money. This is them demonstrating love, not just for the program, but for the entire world being able to use this amazing piece of software for free, okay? And yes, this is actually a topic that I haven't really discussed in the past. Coloring inside of Opentoonz is really difficult. It's kind of frustrating. It would be nice to have coloring features that are inside of Toon Boom. I've seen somebody's tutorial on Toon Boom where you're able to have this weird color-dependent level or layer that basically observes what's going on your cleaned-up animation, and it's able to automatically detect the movement of things, and so that you only need to really color one frame, and then by and large you don't need to worry about having to color the entire animation. It would be really cool to be able to have something like that inside of Opentoonz. I haven't really talked about it in the past because ultimately, even though, yeah, that's obviously easier inside of Toon Boom, it's a $1,000 program, and you know, we're taking steps incrementally. Like, even within the span of 2-3 years that Opentoonz has been around, you're asking them to eat an entire elephant, which is pretty difficult considering we got Opentoonz in a really poor state. So, if you actually think about it, Opentoonz is in an amazing condition considering the fact that it initially came to us broken. So, you know, a big round of applause to the developers because they've been able to do a great job in fixing Opentoonz. It was a complete bombshell when they first got it. So, I understand coloring's difficult. I hate how difficult it is in Opentoonz to color. It sometimes makes me want to pull my hair out. And it is one of the areas inside of Opentoonz where it's found lacking when you compare it to something like Toon Boom. It really is. That's one of those things. You know, how the vectors interact with one another. Again, it's one of those things that's kind of frustrating. I have found out that, you know, grouping specific things together kind of helps Opentoonz determine that these series of lines are related to one another, and so maybe the fill shouldn't exceed past that point. So there are a few things that I've learned about working with vectors and stuff. You know, selecting a bunch of vectors and pressing Ctrl-G to group them together communicates to Opentoonz that if a line passes by those specific vectors on the same level, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to recolor the entire animation. But everything has to happen in its own time. You can't expect a miracle in such a short period of time. You look at the number of features that we've gotten and the improvements that we've gotten within that period of time, and it's kind of dumbfounding. Some of the number of features that we've gotten is, to some extent, better than what you can expect from commercial software. The speed in which Opentoonz is improving is amazing, and all of this coming from just a few developers that are struggling, and they're doing it on their free time with no pay. Since Opentoonz happens to give you a bit of a nightmare and you're pulling your hair out, doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go to the people that are giving their all as a labor of love and tell them that they need to get their act together. You don't need to do that. Artist Teacher goes ahead and responds and says,
it's not quite automatic, but I think the addition of maximum gap to the fill tool does pretty much what was described here. I believe there have also been improvements to snapping. If you haven't given Opentoonz a try recently, you should check out the nightly build.
And then the issue has been closed. So there's a variety of reasons why I decided to discuss this particular story. This is how not to talk to a developer. You can look at some of my older videos that are about a year old and where I start complaining about the Opentoonz interface, and that's how not to talk about open source software. Over the course of the last year, I've been humbled. Had a number of developers get in my face and tell me that they're outright offended, and they had every right to be, okay? So this is how not to talk to a developer. What's being said is valid, how it's being said is not, okay? Now, I understand that we're all human beings, and we all make mistakes and all that, so, I'm sure the developers understand that as well. But in a lot of ways, it's like, pardon the bad language, what they're doing every day is shoveling shit every day, and then some guy yells at them because they're not shoveling shit properly. So, don't be too hard on the developers, they don't deserve it. Please just keep in mind that you're getting the Opentoonz for free, 100% free. So going over to the developers acting like I want a refund, it's not the way you talk to them. Okay, it's not. You can't talk to open source developers like you would customer service for something like an Adobe program where you're having to spend money every month, or it's not the same. Okay, guys? So if you guys enjoyed this story, feel free to click on the link in the video description below. As for the next story, we have project palette not loaded in level after a save. Okay? And the original poster is Lia Lilu, the issue summary, which is
Opentoonz isn't saving all of my level palettes, especially ones from my project palette. Steps to reproduce. I created a project palette with a few new tabs and colors was nothing too crazy. I created my level and dragged and dropped that palette into my level palette. I go ahead and draw on that level with those colors with no problem, and then save all. I close Opentoonz, open it back up to that scene file, and the level shows up all red in the level palette. All I see is the default colors tab, and it's missing all of the project palette tabs that I imported. The same thing happens for each of the different types of imports I try. Merge to current palette, dragging and dropping on the tabs, dragging and dropping on the colors selection of the level palette, and load into current palette. If I merge the project palette into the level palette again, the colors come back. This has been my workaround for now. I also noticed that it will save the level palette if you are in the level when you save. Expected result. I would expect the colors that I merged to stay. Actual result. The level palette goes back to a default palette after I load.
Okay, so currently no one's said anything inside of this. I don't know much about project palettes and such like that. By and large, whenever I create a new scene or something, it's for a 51 animation challenge or something like that. It's a completely different animation. I haven't had to deal with a project where it has multiple scenes involved with it yet, unfortunately. It would be cool to be able to do that, but I haven't come up with any ideas for something like that, and it would take forever to animate it, and I already have years of animating to do in order to finish the 51 animation challenges, but more on point with what we're talking about. This does sound like it'd be annoying, where you're losing your colors and you're having to constantly import them all over again every single time that you use Opentoonz. It sounds a little annoying. I don't know what the issue is necessarily. If developers or someone can take a look at this story in the video description below and let them know what they're doing wrong, or if they are doing everything right, then just check in on this maybe. That would be cool. Or not. Do whatever you want. Okay, so for the next story of the day, we have a story by Behemoth, which is something that means that I like this story already. It's by Behemoth. And he says,
issue summary. Using the tape tool changes the direction of the vector, which leads to incorrect auto-in-betweening.
Which is crazy, and you can actually see it in the GIF right here. And that does look annoying. It really does.
Steps to reproduce. Number 1, create a vector layer with more than 2 frames, for example 12. Number 2, draw from left to right in the first frame 2 non-intersecting lines as in the video. Number 3, copy and paste them into the last frame. Number 4, select all the frames in the level strip and perform the in-betweens operation. The interpolation doesn't matter, at least for presentation purposes. And number 5, go to the first frame and select the tape tool, normal endpoint to line, join vectors, smooth. Number 6, connect the end of one of the lines with the other line. Do not connect the ends so as not to form one solid vector. Number 7, select all of the frames in the level strip and perform the in-betweens operation again. As a result of applying the tape tool, the second vector changes direction. Expected result, the direction of the vector should not be changed since the tape tool was used for editing. Actual result, the direction of the vector changes if the tape tool has been applied to the beginning of the vector.
Yeah, this sounds really annoying. Sounds really annoying. I hope this gets the attention it deserves. I really like any feedback from Behemoth. It's always well informed. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell or go ahead and follow me on Twitter. If you guys would like to see more content from me, feel free to click on any of the content appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.